Oh boy. Gee. Okay, so the mic was off. How did that happen? Oh my. I don't know how that happened. Okay. All right. So sorry, folks. I went through my whole rendition, and so I want to do it again, just to. That's a first. First time the mic didn't work. All right, I'll give you the shortened version. The first thing I covered from last week was somebody was asking about the Michelson-Gale experiment in 1925, and they had asked me if there was a repeat of the Michelson-Gale experiment that I know of, and I know of none. Okay, it was done once, and the reason I said it was done once is because the results were pretty clear. They found what they were looking for, and this again proved the geocentric cosmos, because there was a rotation that they found in 1925, but they never found a revolution of the Earth around the sun. So how do you answer that? Both experiments use the same apparatus, the same principle of light wave interference. So how do you explain that? Well, we can explain it because there is only a rotation. It's the universe rotating around a fixed Earth, just like the Bible says. And that's the reason they got a 98% positive response from the Michelson-Gale experiment, but never got one from the Michelson-Morley experiment from 1887, because the Earth ain't revolving around the sun. That's why. Okay? Very simple. You know, physics would be very simple if they just took the facts as they were and answered them with the best logical answer that could be given. And of course, it's the geocentric one, and nobody wants the geocentric one. Okay, so here we are. What, almost 100 years now since the Michelson-Gale experiment, and nobody's repeated it. Nobody wants to repeat it because I think they're all frightened about what they're going to find. But as my colleague, my trusted colleague, Robert Bennett, Dr. Robert Bennett, who is a co-author with me in the Galileo Was Wrong volume of books. And if you don't know what that is, you can go to robertsongenis.org and find the book Galileo Was Wrong, The Church Was Right. And he reminded me, though, there was another experiment called the Sagnac experiment, done in 1913 by Georges Sagnac, a French scientist, and his name, you can find it if you ever go to Paris, France, and you look at the Eiffel Tower. You can see Georges Sagnac's name on the side of the Eiffel Tower, along with many other French scientists like Henri Poincaré and Louis Pasteur, and let me say, many others. I had the privilege of seeing that when I was in Paris, France, probably about 10 years ago. So at any rate, the Sagnac experiment is very similar to the Michelson-Gale experiment, because it is basically using two light beams going in different directions and seeing if there's a difference. And the Sagnac experiment found a difference in the light speed of these two light beams, and so did the Michelson-Gale experiment. The only difference with Michelson-Gale is that it used a rectangular tubing that was on the ground that didn't rotate, and whereas Sagnac's table, where the light beams were going in opposite directions, could be rotated. The other difference was that the Michelson-Gale tubing was in a vacuum. Okay, so nobody could complain that, well, air did something to the light beams. So anyway, that should take care of that question. Then we had the question last week of Rebecca. Was Rebecca 3 years old when she married Isaac? You already know the answer to that question is no, but I'm going to tell you why. Um, First of all, the idea of 3 years old comes from Jewish tradition. It doesn't come from the Bible. Rebecca's age at no time is given in the Bible. So we can't make any conclusions about Rebecca when she was born, when she got married, or when she died. The reason some of these Jewish, and I think it comes from the tractate Sophirim, and there's a Jewish scholar, Kerim, Kerim, who tries to push this idea that Rebecca was 3. But it's based on the idea that when Abraham took Isaac up to the mountain to sacrifice him, and Sarah's death, as well as Abraham being informed of Rebecca's birth, all happened at the same time. But we don't know that at all. The Bible just gives these events without giving any indication of when they occurred. And we do know the age of Sarah when she dies, 127, but we can't use that to compare against Rebecca. So you can't assume that all those events happened, and therefore you can't assume that Rebecca was 3 years old. So the other thing we have to keep in mind is when Abraham is setting up this meeting for Isaac to meet Rebecca, he says to his servants, "You ask Rebecca if she is willing to marry Isaac. And if she says no, then you leave. You don't force her, you don't cajole her, and nothing. You just leave and it's over." Which implies what? It implies that Rebecca is of a certain age, a more mature age, in which she can decide whether she wants to go with this man. And Isaac at this time is 40 years old. Okay. So he's not only an adult, he's in middle age. And for a girl to decide those kinds of things, she's going to have some maturity about her. So we're looking at least, I would say, about 15 years old to 20 years old. I mean, even today, girls get married sometimes at 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. And sometimes, like a generation ago, you were considered an old maid if you weren't married by at least 25. Okay. So even in our day, we can compare. So it would be no stretch to say that Rebecca would be 15 years old when she married this 40-year-old man. And in those days, the populations were sparse. So, we just had the flood around 2500 and the whole world's wiped out. And now we're repopulating the earth. Abraham is around the year 2000. So you may have had, I don't know, 1 million people on the earth, a couple million, who knows? I mean, it's not going to be a lot. So pickings are small. Okay. And so girls would get married a lot younger in those days than they would be today, of course. But even then, I said there's not that big of a difference because girls get married at a young age today as well. So if that's the case, we can see why Abraham's taken some great precautions here, and he wants to make sure he finds a wife for Isaac. And that's why he goes through all this fanfare of sending the servants to pick a wife for him. So again, all this leads to the fact that Sarah is of mature age, say 15 years old. The other thing too is when she does meet the servants of Abraham, one of them asks her to get water for him and the camels. And Rebecca does. She takes the jug, goes to the well, gets the water, carries it back, puts it in the trowel, blah, blah, blah. So for a woman to carry a jug of water, she's going to have some strength. This is not something a child could do. This is only something a teenager or adult could do. And so again, we have the imagery here that Rebecca is of age. She's of sufficient age to do this task as she is to give consent to marrying this man. So again, the 3-year thing of Rebecca is not kosher. Let's say that. It's not kosher. All right. So now I'm going to get back to the chat room here and see what we got tonight. All right. By the way, I was saying when I was muted that we won't be here next week, as I have said for a couple weeks now. I'm going on vacation. The only vacation I get all year. Out of the 52 weeks a year, I get 1 week. And I'm going to enjoy it. Can't wait. Going down to the beach, I'm going to stick my feet in the sand and in the water, and I'm going to swim my little heart out and bake up some sun, and you'll probably see me with a nice tan, as if I don't have one already, but you'll see me with an even better tan when I come back. So, but I need my vitamin D. I got to get my vitamin D. That comes from the sun. And so this is for health reasons also. At any rate, just wanted to let you know I will not be here next week. Okay. Question. Remember, if you have a question, put the word question in front of your question so I know it's a question. Any questions? All right. Everybody's telling me to unmute myself. Okay, that's all done. Okay. See we. Well, now I know. I see we've been doing this for 4 years. Haven't had a problem. So now I know to look over at the chat room and to see what is going on, because you know and I don't. All right. Okay, I still give like everybody's still talking about me being muted. Now Jonathan, my producer, apparently he's not here tonight. He does know my phone number, so he could call me in instances like this, but he's just not here tonight. All right. All right, here we go. First question. If someone is perfectly justified at the moment of his baptism, in what sense can he increase his justification? Can he become more perfect than perfect? Okay. Um, the best way to answer that is to basically reiterate what Catholic theology understands by justification. It's not a legal thing like it is in Protestantism, okay? Because if it were a legal thing, then it couldn't be increased. I mean, if you're um, legally allowed to get married, let's say, you can't be more legally married to get married, right? Okay. If you're legally allowed to get married, you're legally allowed. That's it. Okay. Um, if you are legally responsible for um, someone who got hurt on your property, you can't be more legally responsible. You're either legally responsible or not. Okay. So there, it's basically a yes, no. There's no in between. You're not semi-legal or three-quarters legal. You're either legal or you're not. So in Catholic justification, it's more of a personal relationship with God. Okay. Why is that? Well, because in Catholic baptism, the soul is infused with God's grace. Okay. So it's a substantive thing. It's not just a check mark you put as a credit in the accounting book. It's a personal thing wherein God now looks at you personally and sees you as desirable, friendly, loving, kind, okay, all those personal things, because he's changed you from the inside. And I think we talked about this last week, did we not? We talked about Luther's dunghill, okay? Luther, being a person who believes in legal justification, said that the best analogy he could think of is a pile of poop, which is what you and I are, and snow, it covers this pile of poop, and that's what God looks at when he looks at us. He doesn't look at the poop, he looks at the snow covering, the pure snow, which they understand to be Christ's righteousness. So God doesn't look at us because we're still the same poop that we were before. So baptism really didn't do anything to us. It just put a covering over us that God can look at and be satisfied. Okay. Not so with the Catholic theology. Big difference. Catholic theology says basically, as I even said last week, it's like taking the snow and putting it inside the poop and making it all white if there's enough snow to do that. Okay. I mean, that's analogy goes so far. It's not going to be perfect, but that's basically what's done. God takes the grace from Christ and infuses it into us to change us from the inside. Okay. So again, it's not a legal transaction. It is a personal transaction. Because we're changed and now we become desirable, we become holy to God, we become loving, kind, and all that stuff. Now, all that, you see, can increase. You can become more loving. You can become holier. Okay? You can become kinder. All those virtues that make us better people every day is what's happening in Catholic justification. So that's why we increase, you see. You can actually become holier to God after baptism because of that. you see. And that's why the saints would lead holy lives, and they reach such stages of holiness that are amazing. Like if you've ever read St. John of the Cross, or St. Teresa of Avila, or St. Teresa of Jesus, Ignatius Loyola. I mean, you can go down the list of these saints that kept getting holier and holier. And one of the reasons also they would try to become holier is to deal with their own sin. Okay? So that's why you can increase in Catholic justification. Okay? All right. Okay, trying to find another question. Everybody's still talking about the sound. So I got a question from Joe. It says, how did Jesus, and then it got cut off. So no question there. All right, Richard says, Robert, the Vedas described Earth as stationary geocentric with diameters of the sun, moon, and planets. Also the sun as moving up and down at an incline, which gives the seasons. Any comment? Well, sometimes you will get charts or graphs or whatever that show the sun on an incline. But they're not exactly correct, okay? Because here's what happens. First of all, you need to know that the sun is the geometric center of the universe. And basically, the sun is going to be the pivot point for the universe. And the universe does two things. And the sun will do the same thing. There is, first of all, a vertical movement, okay? And this is where your reference to moving up and down comes in. It's moving up and down in the sense that there is a 46-degree margin that it moves in. And 46 degrees is what? 23.5 times 2. And it's to 23.5 degrees that gives us each of our seasons, our 4 seasons. So each season, you have 23.5 degrees applied, okay? And 4 times that is 2 times 46 degrees, okay? So basically the sun is moving up and down 46 degrees. From June to December, 46 degrees, and from December to June. Well, I should say the other way around. June to December, 46 degrees, and December to June, 46 degrees, okay? So that takes care of the vertical movement. But then you have also a horizontal movement, okay? And this comes about because if the sun is the geometric center, then, and the Earth is what we call the center of mass, or gravity center of the universe, okay? And keep in mind that Scripture never says that the Earth is in the center of the universe. What it says is that the Earth doesn't move. And in physics, the center of mass does not move, okay? In relation to the sphere that it's in, it does not move. It's always in the same place. If you don't believe this, go throw a tennis racket someday and watch it wobble as it rotates. Why is it doing that? Well, because everything is going around the center of mass, not the geometric center of the tennis racket. Okay, so there's the difference. So if that's the case, if the Earth is not the geometric center, but the center of mass, what's going to happen? Well, as the universe rotates around, it's going to have a what they call a precession. Okay, now you may know what a precession is, because if you've ever spun a top, okay, remember those little toy tops they used to have? You know, you wind it up with the rope or the string, and then you let it go, and it spins and it stays upright. Okay, well, that's a phenomenon in physics where the rotation of an object like that will create forces that allow that top to stay up without falling down. And you remember when that top slowed down, it would start to wobble, and then it would eventually fall down. Okay. But just think if you had no friction, if that top kept on going. Well, if the top kept on going, it would stay straight up and down. Okay. But you could cause a precession on that by just getting a pencil point and nicking the top as it's spinning. And the top is going to keep spinning, but it's going to wobble as it spins. Okay. And that's what you call in physics a precession. Okay. So when the universe is rotating horizontally, it's going like this. Okay. It's going to deal with a wobble or a precession. So now we have two movements of the universe and the sun. We have a vertical movement, has to be 46 degrees up and down. And we also have a wobbling movement, which is what? Okay, well, that's going to be based on a little complicated to explain, but if you extend out so let's put it this way, there's 93 million miles between the Earth and the sun. So you have 186 million mile diameter that the universe is, that are the margins of the universe's wobble. Okay. So the wobble is going to be a little longer than the vertical. But in the end, what's happening is the sun's going to be in a spiral movement. Okay. So it's going to spiral all the way up to the top in June. And then once it reaches that, the forces are going to make it start to go down. And so it's going to go down in a spiral all the way down to the bottom in December. And then the forces are going to make it go back up, you see, because it only has a 46-degree margin to go up to move in. So that spiral is going to be confined to 46 degrees. Okay. So that's basically what's happening. That's what causes our seasons. Everything goes up, the Earth stays still, and everything goes up, and then everything goes down. And depending on where the sun is, that's going to cause the different seasons that we have. Okay. So that would be the way that works. Okay. Let's see what else we have tonight. Germanicus says, is tonight's show going to go overtime? No. I'm lucky I'm here tonight, actually. I'm very tired today. The reason I'm tired is because I've been working all day on this paper I'm writing about aliens. I should probably tell you about this. I'm writing a paper about aliens from the book that was just published by a Catholic named Paul Thigpen. And the title is Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Catholic Church. So remember I covered aliens, what, about 3 weeks ago, was it? And so I did my paper. It's about 18, 19 pages. And I go through his whole book. I read his whole book. And so I've been working feverishly on that to try to get that done before I go on vacation. And then I overdid it today and got tired and didn't rest before I got on the program. So I'm a little tired today. And I'm also thirsty. So I'm going to take a drink here. All right, Dan. So Dan says, Robert never makes mistakes. He thought he did once, but he was wrong. All right, big guy. Okay, so Francisco says, I became Catholic after watching you debate James White. Well, that's no surprise. All right, looking for another question. Scientists are reporting the Earth's rotation has been slowing down for a while before mysteriously speeding up recently. What do you make of this? Their whole understanding of how they're going to measure the so-called rotation is flawed. Okay, so that's the first problem. Speaking of my good friend, Dr. Robert Bennett, he's done some good work on this and can show you why it's flawed. Second, the most they've been able to find, even with their flawed mechanism, is like a micron second here or there. Okay, that's nothing. Okay, I mean, and you can understand this when you compare it to, say, Venus. Venus's rotation has slowed down by 6 minutes in the last 16 years. Okay, that's something. Jupiter's rotation is slowing down. Saturn's is slowing down. We're not too sure about Uranus and Neptune because it's hard to calculate. They're so far away. But those are significant changes. The Earth changing a micron second here or there speaks more of the inaccuracy of the measurement than it does possibly any change in the Earth. And second of all, it's not the Earth that's rotating. You remember that from me, okay? But it really doesn't make any difference, okay? Because the rotation hasn't changed. As long as they've been measuring it, it hasn't changed. And this brings up a good point, because why did God choose to allow the universe, this whole big universe, to rotate around this little tiny Earth, as opposed to having the little tiny Earth rotate within this big universe? Why would he do that? Well, first of all, because it works. Okay, it's probably the most stable mechanism that could ever be built. Why? Well, because in physics there's this thing called momentum or inertia. And you can see it in some industries that use flywheels. What is a flywheel? Flywheel is this big, massive wheel that starts turning, and it keeps the rotation steady. Why? Because of the inertia of a big mass that's put in rotation. Okay? It won't slow down, it won't speed up, it's gonna go the same, and it's gonna help everything else to go the speed that it should go, okay? That's why they put flywheels on the end of, you know, propellers from ships. They put a big flywheel on the end of it so that, the motion will continue and not be disturbed, okay? Well, what massive object do we have? The universe. Talk about a massive object, okay? All that thing needs is a push from its creator, and it'll go spinning ad infinitum at the same speed and never stop. First of all, there's nothing out there to stop it. There's no friction against it. And second, it's got enough momentum to have it go the same speed for trillions and trillions of years if God wanted it to. Okay? As opposed to this little tiny Earth that if that were spinning, there's all kinds of forces out there, internal and external, that would tend to slow down a rotating Earth. First of all, every time you have an earthquake, every time you have a tsunami, every time you have a volcano, every time you have a tectonic plate shift, if that's the way it works, every time you have a tidal shift, you're changing the mass structure of the Earth, and that's going to affect its rotation. Okay? And like we have 1 million earthquakes a year. Not a lot, most of them are big. Okay, they're like around 2, 3, or 4 on the Geiger counter, I'm sorry, on the Richter scale. But you add those all up, and you got some significant forces that are curtailing a rotating Earth if it's rotating. Okay, and the tendency would be to slow down, not to speed up. And that's just the internal forces of the Earth. Okay. Then you can consider all the external forces like the gravitational perturbation of the planets against the Earth, the gravity of the moon against the Earth, the gravity of the sun, the cosmic winds. You add these all up and you got significant external forces. Now, how is this little Earth that's the size of a pea compared to the universe going to sustain all this? It's not. It can't. It's going to be affected. Okay. And if it's affected, then what happens? Well, let's say the rotation of the Earth slows down to 23 hours a day. Well, that means you're going to get an extra hour of sun, and you may think that's good, but it's not, because now you're going to get too much heat buildup. And you keep that going day after day after day, you're going to get so much heat buildup that biological life is not going to be able to survive. Okay? So you see, God's put this together so well, so accurately that just within very slim margins can life actually exist and survive. And this is why he made the universe go around the Earth, because it's the most stable system that could be built. Okay? We don't have to worry about the rotation slowing down. All right. Somebody says, didn't Abraham's servant found Rebecca drawing water? That would include the use of big jug of water. I doubt a 3-year-old can actually do that. Very good, Germanicus. I think I did say that in one way or the other, but thank you for repeating it. Question, can women work in the government like Deborah was a judge in ancient Israel? Become teachers? Should the education system segregate males and females, or are they to be housewives only? Well, they can be teachers, and there could be an occasion where you have a woman who's an expert in her field, and she's teaching some men, okay, her expertise. That's okay. What the Bible is talking about here is when women are in positions of authority and they are in the basically a teaching mode in that sense. Okay. You know, if they teach that a certain law has to be obeyed because of such and such, and they even have the power to enforce it, well, now you have a combination of teaching and authority. And that's what Paul's concerned about, that women are not to be in those positions. Now, this is not to say that the world's going to say, oh, yeah, you know, we've been doing it all wrong. Forget about the world, okay? Paul's talking to Christian women. Christian women, if you want to obey the laws of God, then don't put yourself in an authoritative teaching position, okay? If some men ask you some advice about your expertise in a certain thing, like, you know, whether it's archaeology or baking a cake, the woman can tell them, okay, no problem, because she's not in an authoritative position. She's just giving her expertise. That's fine. We're talking about women who are employed to teach and have authority. That's what Paul is telling Christian women they shouldn't be doing. Okay. So he says it for the family. Okay. In other words, the man is the authority in the family. The church, we know that because only a man can be a priest, okay, or a bishop or the pope. And logically, then, the other area of authority that's going to extend to is the government. But the government's usually not Christian, okay? So the only thing we could say about the government is that Christian women shouldn't be seeking positions of authority in the government, is how it would work. Not that the church can tell the government what to do and say, hey, you can't hire women. The government's going to say, see you later. We're not, you know, we make up our own rules. We don't obey the church's rules. Okay. So it's the directives to Christian women that Paul's concerned about in those three areas of authority: family, church, and government. They're the only authorities that we have. Okay. So that's how it would work. Okay, question says, a major problem for the wider acceptance of geocentric theory seems to be that in order to explain the seasons, the whole universe would need to oscillate up and down between the tropics. Well, that's correct. There's no difficulty in that. Of Cancer and Capricorn. Wouldn't one need to introduce a completely new physical force to explain this bouncing up and down movement of the whole universe? No. This is all caused by the fact that the universe is off center. Okay. Let me go back to the illustration of a top. You have this little top toy. You wind it with a string. You pull it, and the top spins. Okay. Now, and you poke it with a pencil, and what will you see? You'll see the top start to wobble a little bit as it rotates. Okay. Now, that is limited by the fact that the top has to rest on something. The point of the top has to rest on a table in order for you to see the precession, the horizontal precession. Okay. But if you had the top such that you could take away the table and the top could stay in midair, okay, you're also going to see a vertical precession, okay, up and down, because the whole thing has to move. You're just not going to move horizontally, it's going to move vertically also, okay, because there's 3 dimensions to space, not just one. So that would be hard to illustrate here because you always have something underneath the top that it has to rest on in order to, you know, do its thing. But theoretically speaking, that would be the physical force. You're going to get the um, momentum of a off-center rotation that's going to make that force for you. And just like the precession only goes so far in the top, in other words, once the precession starts, it doesn't start going like this. It only makes a precession proportionate to the force that you use to tip the top, okay, or to move the top. If you move the top a lot with the pencil, then you're going to get a big precession. But see, you have a margin then of how that top is going to precess, and it's not going to go beyond those margins. Same thing with the vertical. You're going to have a margin of how much that off-centeredness and that's going to make the momentum is going to push that thing, and it's only going to be 46 degrees. Okay. Now, how does it get that way? God made it that way. Okay. He gave the universe enough of a off-center position so that you're going to get a wobble horizontally and vertically. And it happens to take place over a year's time. Beautiful. Okay. All right. Question, Oscar says. Scientists discovered that we live in the center of a bubble. Also, they say this void can be found everywhere in other galaxies and the blue spots of the CMB. What do you think? There are two possible things going on here. A few years ago, there was Timothy Clifton, I think, came out with a paper saying that we live in a void. And they tried to tie this to the Big Bang Theory, which is where it starts to fall apart. But the idea was that the Earth was in the center of a void in the sense that there were no galaxies real close by. You didn't really start to see galaxies until you get out to greater radii, and the Earth was, in this bubble or this void, as they called it. So that could be one thing they're referring to. As far as having bubbles in the blue spots of the CMB, I haven't heard that. So if you have any information on that, Oscar, please forward it to me. I'd like to take a look at it. And as far as galaxies, I don't know where that void would be. All I know is that when you get a conglomeration of galaxies, it might be the case that there's a void there. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was, because they see the same thing when they measure the quasars in the sky. They see quasars in practically every area of the universe. The first thing that told them was that the Earth was in the center of it all, because they expected to see quasars just basically on a horizontal plane. But then they saw them everywhere, and that means the Earth is in the center. And there's a guy who wrote a book about it. His name is Jonathan Katz, K-A-T-Z, from the University of Washington in Missouri, who wrote a book called Quasars, the Biggest Bangs. And he has a chapter in there called The Copernican Dilemma. And basically what he says is that all these quasars form a void, and the Earth is in the void. Okay, so you get that with quasars, you get it with galaxies, because when they did the SDSS study back in 2005, they found that our galaxy with the Earth in it is in a void area, and all the other galaxies are at, you know, large radii away from that area. So in that sense, but see, these are all the galaxies that you're talking about. They're not talking about just single galaxies. So I don't even know how a galaxy could have a void area. One galaxy has a void area. That's hard to comprehend. So again, if you find some information on that, let me know. All right, question. Do you have an opinion about the proper age for confirmation? Is there a danger in delaying confirmation until the mid-teens, given our current social climate, in your opinion? No, if you raise your children right, there shouldn't be a problem. Okay. Confirmation, I would dare say that most of the confirmations that are received today, the power of that confirmation lays latent within the individual and has not even been used yet. Okay. And that is what will happen with God's grace. You receive it in the sacrament. See, the sacrament's not going to be like, a lightning bolt charge. Okay. The sacrament is God's grace, but it needs a willing and cooperative host, you or me, to be able to use that grace. Okay. If and when we decide to use that grace, it's there. The church promises that it's there. Okay. But how many teenagers, Catholic teenagers, do you know today who are of that mold? Not many. Okay. They're much more interested in, the latest fashion and the latest games and the latest this, and they like drugs and they like rock and roll music and blah, blah, blah. So, look, you're not going to get many Catholics, teenagers that are going to take advantage of the confirmation. Okay. But they sure need it. So, if you've raised them right up until the age of 13 or 14, when now you're supposed to become a soldier of Christ. Why do they use the imagery of soldier? Because, brother, you're in a battle. You're in a battle. You're not a kid anymore. Okay? You're going to have to face the world like every other Joe does. And you're going to have to take your lumps, and you're going to have to learn how you fit in, and you're going to have to make money, and you're going to have to relate to people, and sometimes they're not going to be real nice. This is not like when you're 5 years old and, Johnny next door hits you in the nose and mommy's there to cuddle you. Okay. That's over. Now you're on your own, basically, or you're learning to be on your own. And soon you're going to be out the door at 18 or 19 years old or whatever, and you're going to be on your own. So you better learn. Okay. And so, especially in our day and age when Christians are highly outnumbered, especially Catholic Christians, in order to meet the challenge of the war that you are going to entail, you're going to need God's grace of confirmation. And if you're serious about your faith, if you're serious about defending the Catholic faith and serious about honoring and praising God on a daily basis, that confirmation grace will be quite handy. Okay. And you will be amazed at how powerful it is. Okay. So I hope I answered your question. All right, next question. How do we respond to slavery? Because unbelievers will quote Exodus 21, Leviticus 25, Deuteronomy 15, Ephesians 6, and say your Bible's evil for having slavery. Well, because they don't understand what slavery is in the biblical sense. Okay. Slavery in our day, when the blacks were taken from Africa to be slaves for the wealthy, capitalist Americans coming over here. They basically stripped them of all their rights, human rights. They paid them pittance for wages. They disrespected them. They mishandled them. They didn't treat them like human beings. Okay. But boy, they were good workers. And when you do that to a human being, okay, that's the notion of slavery that was being um, um, propagated in the United States at the time of the Civil War. They couldn't vote, but they'll take their labor and they'll take their military duty, but that was it. You see, that's as far as it went, because they were useful then. So you're basically mistreating human beings, and they had no freedom. So that's what the whole thing about slavery was. Okay, that was not the notion of slavery in biblical times. Okay, now amongst the Jews, they had this whole thing where the Jews were the holy people of God and the nations were sinners, and so you could make a Gentile your slave. But even then, they weren't mistreated. There are rules in the Pentateuch that if you have a Gentile slave, you are to treat him with respect and dignity, and you give him this, you give him that. They were taken care of, okay? They were not on the same level as the Jew, okay? And naturally so, because they weren't Jews. Sometimes the Jews were told to separate from sometimes, a lot of times they were told to separate. Even when they came back from Babylon, they were told to get rid of their Gentile wives, to start over again. Okay, so that's how much the Jews were to be considered the people of God, as opposed to the nations of the world. Okay, but as I said, there were rules that the Jews had to obey, and if the Jews didn't obey them, then the Jew would be punished for that, for mistreating a Gentile. Okay, so that's a whole different ballgame than the slavery we had in the United States or elsewhere in the world, where they're even treated worse than they were in the United States. Okay, that's the big issue. Okay, all right. Can you explain blue shift? I understand they have found some stars blue shifted directly in front of redshifted galaxies. Please answer after you turn the sound on. Basically, a blue shift, first of all, they don't really know what causes redshift and blue shift. There's a lot of things that can cause it. There's 60 different, who was the guy who put it out? What's his name? Wrote a book about it. Can't remember his name right now. 60 different reasons for redshift or blue shift. Okay. One of the reasons would be that the light source is moving away from you. If the light source is moving away from you, you have a wavelength that's going to be stretched. If the wavelength is stretched, then it's going to move to the red end of the spectrum. Okay, that's one possibility. But here's another possibility. Okay, gravitational redshift, wherein you have a galaxy and the light leaves the galaxy. Okay, and the gravity of the galaxy is pulling on the light beam and stretching the wavelength. And so what are you going to see? You're going to see a redshift as the galaxy's light is leaving the galaxy. Okay, so that seems to be the total opposite when you have the galaxy moving away and the redshift being, or the wavelength being stretched to give a redshift. Okay, so there you got two opposing definitions of redshift. And guess what? They don't like the gravitational redshift because that would put the Earth in the center of the universe. Yeah. And I have that on high authority from, what's his name, Paul Davies, who recognized that. If you have an inhomogeneous universe and you have gravitational redshift, that means the Earth is in the center. Okay. So there's a lot of politics going on as to which reason you choose for redshift. Okay. Now, a blue shift would be just the opposite. You know, if the object in the first scenario is coming towards you, the light source is coming towards you, then it's going to squeeze the wavelength and it's going to shift to the blue end of the spectrum. Okay. So that's what would be blue shift in that framework. And but again, they really don't know. The only places they find blue shift are galaxies that in our what they call our local area. And when we say local, we're not talking about just down the street, okay? We're talking about local being like Andromeda Galaxy would be a local galaxy because it's in our vicinity, so to speak, okay? It's near the Milky Way. When they talk about redshift, seeing redshift in the galaxies, that is most of the galaxies, they're talking about galaxies that are pretty far away, okay? Those are the ones we all see redshift in. We don't see any blue shift in front of them. So you could see a blue shifted Andromeda galaxy in front of a redshifted galaxy because all the galaxies in our local area are blue shifted. Okay. Which could mean that, they're coming closer to us. It could mean something totally different. Okay. We don't know for sure. Because, as I said, there's so many reasons why you can have a red shift or a blue shift. So that's as far as I'm going to take it tonight anyway. Can you comment on the illumination of conscience from various saints? Well, I think I know what you're referring to, and who was it? Maria Tiagi, who said that there's going to come a time where there's going to be an illumination of conscience for 3 days and all this kind of stuff. I wouldn't believe that for a second. Okay. That's not the way God works. It's not the way he has ever worked. And you have an illumination of conscience every day. Your conscience doesn't go on vacation. It's there with you 24/7. And so you know right and wrong. It's one of the strongest feelings a human being can have, and that's his conscience. It never quits. And it will bother you until you get it right. Okay? So we don't need an illumination of conscience. We already have it. The people that want to sin because they love their sin and they ignore their conscience. But their conscience is still there reminding them that this is evil. And that's the reason God's going to judge them, because they know it's evil because of the conscience that God gave them. And Paul teaches that in Romans chapter 2. God has put a conscience into us for that very reason, so that we know right and wrong. Okay? So don't be looking for some event in the future where everybody's going to be illuminated and I finally know I'm a sinner because I have the illumination of conscience. No, that's not the way it works. Okay. Question, would it even be possible to live on a rotating planet? You might fall down when trying to walk. Well, let's put it this way. The rotation, let's say on Jupiter, would have to be slow enough where the centrifugal force that's going to be caused by the rotation is not going to be in conflict with the gravity. Okay. If the rotation is fast enough and the centrifugal force is going to make you fling off of Jupiter, and that is overcome Jupiter's gravity, yeah, then you'd have a problem. But that's not the way it works. Okay, the rotation is relatively slow compared to what they call the escape velocity that you would have to even get a foot off of Jupiter. Okay, So that would not be a problem. All right. Is there any known way to predict the timing of the radioactive decay of a single atom from isotope carbon-14 to carbon-12? Well, not exactly, but they think they can they will count the atoms over the decay of the atoms in isotope carbon-14 over a period of time. Okay, let's say they counted the number of, and they can count it on a Geiger counter. They can count how many atoms have changed from C14 to C12. And let's say you do that over 30 days. Okay, so you see how many decayed, you estimate how many atoms are in the carbon specimen that you have, and then you make a ratio. When you say, well, if that's the case, then the half-life of carbon has to be 5,500 years. That means half the specimen is going to decay from C14 to C12. Okay, you can make those kinds of estimates. And carbon is one of the faster decaying isotopes of all the isotopes, you know, compared to potassium, argon, or rubidium, strontium, things like that, where they calculate that the half-life has to be in the billions of years. Okay. Now, what they do that's not correct, that's fallacy, is they'll take the radioactive decay from uranium to thorium, and they'll say, well, this has to occur over 48 billion years, the half-life, which means half the specimen of uranium turns to thorium. And they'll use that to say, well, that means that there has to be billions of years out there of the universe's existence for anything like this to occur. That's not correct at all. Okay, you could have a slow decaying isotope that may have one Geiger tick per 30 days. Okay, and so if you calculate it out, yeah, the half-life's going to have to be in the billions of years, but who cares? All you know is that one isotope decayed over 30 years, so what does that tell you? Well, it must be pretty stable. If you're only going to get one isotope to decay in 30 days, you have a very stable element. But that stable element could have been around and started 6,000 years ago, or it could start 6 billion years ago. It doesn't make any difference. The fact is, the decay rate is what the decay rate is. That's all you know. Okay? And to make any kind of calculation as to how old that uranium must be, you have to know what the parent to daughter ratio was at the beginning. If you don't know, then you're just in a guessing game. And which way do you think they're going to guess? You think they're going to guess in the 6,000 year range or the 6 billion year range? Yes, they're going to guess in the 6 billion. They're going to assume that it's 6 billion. They don't know that, but that's what they're going to assume. Why? Because they've already had the paradigm established that this universe is billions and billions of years old. Okay? And it came from time and chance. The only other option is it came from God 6,000 years ago. And they don't want that option. Okay? So it's just a big game. What's that game called? It's a shell game. That's what it is. It's a shell game. You ever see the guys in New York operate a shell game? Well, that's what evolution in radiometry is. It's a shell game. I mean, you can prove this very easily. Take a diamond. Now, a diamond should have according to the calculations, there shouldn't be any more C14 left in a diamond. Okay, but we still calculate C14 in diamonds today. Well, how can that be? If it took billions and billions of years and the carbon half-life is 5,500 years. Okay. There shouldn't be any carbon-14 left, okay? If the Earth is, billions of years old, when these diamonds were supposedly made, then we still find carbon-14, which means what? The diamonds are young, okay? The diamonds are young. All right. All right. Do you think the lack of understanding of predestination is a big origin of a lot of heterodox views in the church today? Do you think the deoxylus issue is important? The predestination issue used to be a big issue. It's not anymore. Okay, because they finally figured out they don't know how to figure it out. Okay. The predestination issue was big with Augustine. He's the one who basically started the whole study of predestination in the early church. And he was going against several people, particularly a guy named Lucidus, who was anti-predestinarian. And then after Augustine, you don't hear much about it until you come to about the 9th century. And you had a guy there named Gottschalk, who was promoting not only predestination, but absolute predestination. And I said Lucidus was against it. No, Lucidus was promoting absolute predestination. And that's important to know, because when you say absolute predestination, what you're saying is that God predestines the saved and the unsaved. Okay? Before they're ever born, before they even know there's a God, they're predestined to hell, which was Lucidus's view of predestination. Augustine said no. He had a hard time explaining it, but he would eventually come down on the side that no, only the saved are predestined. Okay. And of course, that's going to create a little hole, little vacuum that needs to be filled, because even the local council of what was it in the 8th century? Forget the name of that council. I'm thinking of Trullo, but I'm not sure if that's the correct one. But they even said that the wicked are predestined to hell. A local Catholic council. Okay. So you can see this issue was in some fluidity. It had not been settled. And then, of course, Gottschalk came along and started talking about absolute predestination. And Aquinas came after that. He tried to settle it. He didn't settle it, except to side more with, he was probably more on the side of absolute predestination than Augustine was. Because you find in Thomas statements that say all things are preordained by God, but then you'll find him saying that God works by contingencies. So it's like, well, which is it, Thomas? Is it preordained or is it contingent? And so he was on both sides of the issue. He never settled it. But he still is known for his, what we would say, more extreme predestination views than Augustine was. Okay. And then you come to, they had a little skirmish about this in the early Middle Ages, around 13, 14, 1500s. And then, of course, Luther came along and started to bring up absolute predestination again. And that's why Luther was excommunicated from the Catholic Church, not for his views on indulgences, but for his views on absolute predestination. And he was excommunicated in 1520, and in 1525 he proved the Pope right because he wrote a book called The Bondage of the Will, which says you don't have a free will. You are predetermined to go to heaven or hell, and that's it. It's over. You're just along for the ride. And then Calvin after him basically said the same thing. And then they had the same problem. People couldn't live with that doctrine. It just didn't seem right. They knew something was wrong with it. So Philip Melanchthon, who was Luther's protege, started to buck on that absolute predestination issue. And so by the time the Formula of Concord came along in 1530, they were already talking about mixing free will with predestination. Okay. And then you had the Remonstrants come along after Calvin in Holland, and they were following Jacob Arminius, and they went completely the other way. You know, hardly any emphasis on predestination and everything on free will. Okay. So this battle has been waged for the 2,000 years of Christian history, and nobody has ever been able to solve this problem. The best that the Catholic Church has done on this, and they even had a tussle about it, was under Pius V. You had the Molinists against the Thomists, because the Molinists wanted the middle way, and the Thomists wanted the absolute way, and Pius didn't settle the issue. He just said, we're just going to let it go. Both sides will accept. And that's really the last time the church struggled with this issue, and for good reason, because it's unsolvable. Okay? We know that both exist, predestination and free will. How they work together, we don't have a clue. Okay? We don't have a clue how the Trinity fits together. We can tell you aspects of it, of each person. We can tell you the oneness side of it. We can tell you the diversity side of it, but we don't know how to join the two. We just don't have that capability. Okay. We can tell you what you can't say about the Trinity, but we can't really tell you what it is and how it functions. Okay. Except dealing with one side at a time. You know, you want to talk about the diversity side? Well, we're good at that. We can tell you about what all the persons do and all that. And you want to talk about the unity side? We can talk about one substance and all that. We're good at that. But how to combine those two, it's a little hard. Okay. Same with predestination and free will, and some other things in Christianity, and they are enigmas to us. But what the Catholic Church has always done, and the Protestants have said this about the Church, is she has the uncanny ability to hold in tension two diverse ideas that seem contradictory, but the Bible says they fit together. Okay. And that's what the Catholic Church has done. And that's one thing I appreciated about the Catholic Church. She may not be able to explain it to you, but she's going to go by what Scripture says. And Scripture says there's both predestination and free will. And we'll let God worry about how to put those two things together. And as he does, or when he does, we can depend upon it that he is just. He doesn't lie. He will not fudge or make a pretense. He will tell the exact truth, and everybody's going to get exactly what they deserve. Okay? All right. Question. If it wasn't for your friend that told you they are pre-programming GPS with the Sagnac effect, I don't think we would have found out. God knows what else they do with models they use for satellites to send them in orbit. Well, thank you, Harith 90. You remembered that, didn't you? Wow. Yes, my friend, what's his name? Um, 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 who told me that he worked for Hatch, Ron Hatch. Ron Hatch worked for Navcom in California, and you can tell by the name Navcom that they navigate satellites. And they had a contract with John Deere Tractor. And John Deere Tractor makes tractors now that are unmanned. They are controlled by GPS satellites. And so Ron Hatch's job, and Ron Hatch was in our movie The Principal, by the way, in 2014, and I got to meet him at his interview. And he has since died. He died, I think, now almost 2 years now. At any rate, Ron Hatch was the one, and I hope his stuff is still on the internet. You can find all about how they pre-program the GPS for the Sagnac effect in Ron Hatch's papers, and how he found out was, in order to get these tractors to go straight and not end up in the ditch, you have to program them correctly. And that means you have to get into the programming of the GPS satellite. And so when Ron got the program of the GPS satellite to make sure everything was going to work correctly, he found out that they fudged the computer workings of the satellites to compensate for this, what we call the Sagnac effect. Okay. The Sagnac effect found out that light speed is not constant. That's basically the result of the Sagnac experiment and also the Michelson-Gale experiment. And it depends on which direction that light beam is going that will determine the final speed of that light beam. If that light beam goes from east to west, it goes faster than if it goes west to east. Every day, all day. So if light is constant, then there shouldn't be a discrepancy between east and west travel directions, okay? But there was. And so what do? Well, you just pre-program the computer to take into effect the difference between the light speed going one way as opposed to the other way, and the computer doesn't know the difference, okay? The computer just balances it out and makes it appear as if light's going the same speed, whether it's going east or west. And unless you have that correction, then that tractor is going to go into the ditch, okay? It won't go in a straight line. So Ron found this out, and Ron, being a physicist, knew the implications of this, okay? All this hullabaloo about light speed being constant, which is the basis for the special theory of relativity, is bunk, okay? Of course, they found the same thing out in the Michelson-Morley experiment, but nobody could believe their eyes. So what their excuse was, well, I'll tell you what must have happened here, fellas. You know, the arm of Michelson's interferometer must have shrunk. Okay, because we know that the speed of light must be constant, so something's got to give somewhere. So it must be with the apparatus. It must have shrunk somehow. We can't tell you how, but it must have shrunk. Because why? Because we know the Earth goes around the sun. That's why. Okay. The opposite, of course, is the Earth doesn't move and the light beam isn't the same speed everywhere. Well, we can't have that, can we? Because that means we're going to have to bow to Pope Urban VIII and say, yeah, we were the ones that were wrong. The earth doesn't move. Okay? That's not about to happen. All right, so there you go. That's the background on that story. Um, Question: what do you think about the lunar landings? Are they legit? Some say they are all fakes. Others say only the 1969 landing was faked, and others believe they are all legit. Of course, you're going to get 57 varieties, right? On any topic. So pick the one you want. Personally, yeah, I have a hard time believing, okay, that 1969 computer technology, which is much less than on my cell phone, is going to get us to the moon and back. Yeah, I do have a hard time believing that. I don't know for sure. Okay. Maybe by some miracle they got there and were able to come back. But I find it hard to believe. Okay. That's just me personally. So, of the three you choose, I'm probably the ones who say that it's more likely not legit. Okay. All right. Uh, Question: how can capital punishment vis-a-vis abortion be justified? Not understanding your question there, Ben. Um, how can capital punishment vis-a-vis abortion be justified? I don't know what the connection is between the two. So you're going to have to elaborate. Sorry there, Ben. Question: do you think Pope Francis will lead the church into a false church? As mystics have said, a false church is coming. Um, who knows? Every time I predict the future, I get it wrong unless I read it directly from the Bible. The Bible does tell me that yes, the church is headed for hard times, faithlessness. Yes, that is true. Whether the Pope will lead us there or the people themselves will get themselves there, I don't know. Okay, either possibility is there. I would say at the rate we're going, the hierarchy is, you know, they take the brunt of the responsibility, let's say. Okay. But I don't want to get the people off the hook because there's a lot of false Catholics out there who are Catholic only in name and don't give a whit about the Catholic Church or about God. So, my goodness. It's the same as it was in the Old Testament, You had millions of Jews, but there was a small remnant who were actually faithful to God, obeyed him, praised him, loved him, worked for him, where the rest were just Jews in name. Okay. And by the time Jesus came, it was at its peak, the split between, the real Jew and the false Jew. So it is today in the Gentile world, same thing. So, the Bible says we're headed for the Antichrist, where the apostasy has to come first. What's an apostasy? It's a falling from the faith. Where's the faith? It's in the church. So it means the church is going to fall in that sense. Okay. And the Antichrist is going to take over. That's all going to happen, Paul assures us, before Christ comes back. So that's where we're headed. And it looks like we're making some good progress. All right. I have one question about reality. If everything is a wave and vibration, can we not prove it is the sound of God, the word everything is created by? No. God's word has nothing to do with waves and vibration. Okay. Waves and vibrations are physical things, moving physical things. Okay. God's voice, whatever way he made it come, was done. when he created the world, and he's not speaking now. Okay. He spoke when Jesus came and he said, "Behold my beloved son in whom I am well pleased." And that was it. So as far as speaking, there is no continual speaking of God. Okay. But there are continual waves and vibrations, that is for sure. All right. Preben says, if I understood correctly, we have two Coriolis forces. This makes the tornado spin in the opposite directions in the northern and southern hemisphere. But if the universe goes from east to west, just one direction, how can that be? Well, that is the case because if you put the center of mass at the if you put the equator of the center of mass at the universal equator, you've basically divided the universe in half. Okay. If that is the case, then you start from the center of that equator down, or you start from the center of that equator up. Okay. And that's going to require two different directions for the Coriolis force. So it really has nothing to do with the east-west direction. It has to do with the fact that the Earth is right smack in the center of the gravitational mass center where it splits the northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere. That's why. Okay? And that's going to cause two different directions. All right. I'm making it. I was tired, but I'm going to hang out here for 7 more minutes. Question: do you think the lack of understanding of predestination is okay? We already went through that one. If Jupiter's rotation has been slowing down, what will happen when they stop rotating? Well, they're not going to stop rotating. Okay. I mean, if it's taken 6,000 years or more to have this change, it's going to take another 6,000 years to double that. Okay. So not in our lifetime. So don't worry about it. When did the flood happen? How many thousands of years ago? The flood of Noah's day probably occurred around 2500 BC. And you can get there by looking at the genealogies of Genesis 5 and 11, adding and subtracting where you should, and you come up with, I think it's like 2554 BC, something like that. Now, I go through all that calculation in my Genesis commentary, okay? And I use the Masoretic text, which contains hopefully the original Hebrew, the Samaritan Pentateuch, and the Septuagint. Okay, because you have 3 different accounts of the genealogies. They're close, but there's some discrepancy, especially with the Septuagint compared to the Hebrew. So they're going to have different dates for the creation of Adam. They're going to have different dates, obviously, for the flood, because that's all calculated from the creation of Adam. And they're going to be off. And but the Masoretic text one, which I think is the one that, of course, the Hebrew was only inspired. The Septuagint was not inspired. So the Septuagint is good as a translation. I mean, if you wanted a translation of something the Psalm said, yeah, you can use a Septuagint. But as far as genealogies and numbers are concerned, you have to take the Septuagint with a grain of salt. Okay. So it's going to have a different date for the flood. But the one for the Masoretic text is about 2500 BC. All right. Can Protestants and Orthodox be saved? Eugene IV, ex cathedra, 1441, seems to deny this. What about the unbaptized? Love the show. Yes, Protestants and Orthodox can be saved because God's the saver. Okay, God decides who's going to be saved and who's not going to be saved. God's going to judge you based on what you know, how you've been brought up, all those kinds of things. What Eugene IV and Boniface VIII were talking about are those people who say, the Catholic Church, we don't need you. Sorry, we can get saved outside of the church. You have nothing to do with salvation. Whether we're Jew, Muslim, what you call schismatic, heretic, we don't care anymore, okay? Because you're not in control of salvation. That is the Catholic Church. And we're going to go out on our own, and we can be saved any way we deem fit. That's what Eugene and Boniface VIII were coming down against, okay? It's one thing to say that somebody who has never heard of the Catholic Church or is outside of the church his whole life without his own fault can be saved. But those who say the Catholic Church is not in charge of salvation and they have no power to say somebody's saved or not saved or inside or outside the church, forget about it, okay? The Catholic Church does have that authority. The whole reason we can be saved is because the Catholic Church is here, okay? And yet within the Catholic Church, we have exceptions. Not everybody has to be a formal member of the Catholic Church in order to be saved. Through no fault of their own or whatever circumstance brought them to that point, okay? Again, what the Catholic Church is against are those who say, we have no need of the Catholic Church for salvation. That is a bold-faced lie. All right. We got about 3 minutes left. Duke of Sahib. Is there a particular saint that has made a profound impact on your life? Several. St. Robert Bellarmine, number one. Love the man. Just love the man. Humble man, intellectual man, biblical man, church man, God man. Just had it all. Robert Bellarmine. Besides the fact that he told Galileo to take a hike. Augustine, Aquinas, gosh, you know, how do you rate those? They're just fantastic people. But I'd put Robert Bellarmine at the top of the list. And not just because my name's Robert, okay? Don't be saying that. All right. All right, we answered that question about slavery. Dr. Sungenis, should you do more debates, or should you do more debates? Yep, I should. So we'll see if I can add that to my repertoire. All right, I'm going to call it quits here, people, because there's like 50 questions left and I don't have time to answer them, so I'm going to cut it off. So remember, I will not be here next week. I'm going to have a vacation and I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going down to the beach. I'm going to stick my feet in the water, in the sand, and I'm going to get a suntan. So when I come back, you will see me with a tan. Not that I don't have one already, as most people told me. But I'm going to have a good time. So you have a good time too. Get your questions ready for 2 weeks from now, and I will be back. And we will do this all over again. And in the meantime, please visit robertsungenis.org and look at our vast array of products, all written by yours truly and made by yours truly. So, and I do need your help to keep on going. Things are getting a little tight around here. And I don't know if it's the summertime or not, but I do need your help. So please consider giving a donation. Okay, if you've been benefiting from this program and all the other stuff that I do, please give a donation, and also consider becoming a monthly donor. Okay, so they're like $10 a month. Man, that would be perfect. If everybody gave $10 a month, I wouldn't have to cry to you. But I'm crying, so please give, please help. That's all I can say. All right, if God touches your heart, please consider. Let's see. I think that's it. I think that is it. All right. We'll see you next week. Stay healthy, stay sinless, and stay close to God.